Welcome everyone to this first hybrid meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. Please note that the meeting is being broadcast and recorded. For clarity, voting is only permitted by the members who are present in the room. Any member who is joining remotely is able to participate in the debate but not able to vote. Other than that, the usual rules apply. Are there any apologies?
None received, Chair.
Okay. I can see the members of the committee who are in attendance and their names will be recorded in the minutes. Is anyone attending remotely?
I can confirm there is no members joining remotely.
Thank you very much. Next, the full text of declarations of interest is set out in the agenda. If any member has a disclosable pecuniary interest or an affected interest to declare, please indicate by putting your hand up, and I will come to you in turn. No, there's nobody. No declarations of interest. But I'll remind everyone that you can make a declaration at any time should it occur to you at a later point. Anyone declaring a disclosable pecuniary interest will be asked to leave the meeting when they get to the relevant item. Agenda item 3 is to approve the minutes from the Governance and Audit Committee meeting of the 23rd of March 2022 and the annual meeting of the 18th of May 2022. Do I have a seconder for the minutes?
I'm happy to second, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All those in favour of the minutes? Minutes are approved. Are there any urgent items for consideration?
No, none notified, Chair.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 5, to receive the Internal Audit Annual Assurance Report. Over to Sally for that.
Thank you, Chair. Sally Hendrick, Head of Audit and Risk Management. This is my annual report that I'm required to bring every year to the Audit Committee to give an opinion on the risk management, governance and internal control arrangements within the Council. And it's time to inform the annual governance statement, which you'll also be looking at later on the agenda. It's a very lengthy report, so I just thought the best thing to do would be just to draw your attention to certain key parts of the report itself. So I would draw your attention to page 15, which sets out my opinion for the year, which is concluding that the Council has adequate arrangements in place for risk management and corporate governance. And then secondly, moving on to the internal control area, I've concluded that the progress that we had during 2021 was sustained, and so I'm able to give partial assurance again on the internal control environment, but no further improvement on that. So that's still not at the sort of adequate level. I'm also required to set out conformance with the public sector internal audit standards, which are mandatory. So this section below the opinion is doing that. It's actually saying that we are compliant with those public sector internal audit standards, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. And then the key next section for you to look at would be on the following page, which sets out the summary of the outcome of the 21-22 audits. So you can see there what the opinion levels were throughout the 21-22 audits and compare that to the 2021 audits. As you'll see, we delivered quite a lot more audit work than we were able to in 2021. And we've also got a number of audits that were still ongoing at the time of producing this report. So there's probably about another 6 audits there that we've done. So we've been able to achieve a lot more this year now that we are moving forward and we are less affected by the impact of COVID in terms of being able to deliver our audits. So moving on to the next section I would draw attention to, which is informing my opinion. If you look at page 18 onwards, this is the section which pulls out those areas where we have found significant control weaknesses during the course of our audits. So you can see there's quite a number of areas there, and it does include a few schools as well. As you might remember, during 2021 we were unable to carry out any school audits because we couldn't get access into schools. They weren't able to support the audit process. So we've carried out quite a few audits of schools this year, and there are a few of those where we found some areas of weakness. So that's the section on the significant weaknesses. I also, in this report, provide an update on what the position is on those audits where we gave a partial or inadequate opinion in previous years, and that is actually set out on page 24 onwards. So you can see from there what the latest position is on those areas where previously we'd found significant issues, and you'll see there are a number of those where those matters have still not been fully addressed, which is one of the reasons why my opinion for the year is still only partial assurance, because there's still further progress that needs to be carried out. Then the next area I would draw your attention to would be the public sector internal audit standards assessment. We are required to comply with public sector internal audit standards, and one of the requirements of the public sector internal audit standards is that we have an external independent assessment carried out on our service once every 5 years. So we've had that carried out in March this year. It was carried out by CIPFA, and they were able to conclude that we were fully compliant with the auditing standards, so we're very pleased with that, especially as we have had significant resource pressures during this year, so that was very, very reassuring to be able to get that confirmation that we are fully compliant. It only pulled out a few areas of things for us to look at. One of them was a recommendation that I should meet privately with the chair of the Governance and Audit Committee. That's good practice, and we've already started to do that. So we had our first private meeting yesterday in advance of this meeting here this evening. And then the other areas were just advisory points. The first one being that we should be looking to use data analytics more. We've already done some training on that, but it's something we know we need to focus on a little bit more, to use those and pick up some sort of efficiencies through the use of data analytics. And the second advisory point reflects the fact that there are significant resource pressures nationally for auditors. It's very, very difficult to recruit. Very, very hard at the moment, not just with local authorities, but with the firms as well. It's very, very hard. So what the assessor was suggesting is that we might want to go down the apprentice route, and we're already exploring that, and we've already met with the apprentice levy team at the council, and are due to meet some of the providers of those that training, I think on 6th of July. So we're pushing forward on that to try and take that forward, and try and address that to help us, to help our pressures on our resources. And then at the end of this report, in the appendices, I always include a full breakdown of where we are with the audit plan, so you can see exactly where we are on every audit that we've done and what the outcomes were and which ones we had to defer into the following year. And then on from that, there is the appendix, which includes the full report that CIPFA produced on the compliance with the public sector internal audit standards. That's all I was going to say about the report. I'm very happy to take any questions that anyone has.
Peter.
Thanks, Chair. It's really, I suspect I'm misunderstanding something, but where you were doing your significant issues, so for example on page 20, 21, it talks about advisory review with no audit opinion, but major observations raised. Surely, if it's advisory with major observations, isn't that an audit opinion? I don't quite understand what the difference is. I hope that I'm not being pedantic, but it does seem to conflict.
There are sort of operational reasons why we've done that. There are operational reasons why we've done that. That was due to the fact that it would take us some considerable time to get the reports agreed with finance. So this is why I've issued it in this format. But it has actually identified some further significant issues, and that's the key thing to take from this, I think.
So I still find it a little bit confusing. Sorry, it might just be me, but...
It's really just a question of format. It's really just a question of format. If with an advisory review, we would make our comments and observations. If I had produced a full report, I would have included proposed recommendations in there which would require management responses. And due to the significant delays that we have in getting responses from the finance team, I took the decision, because this was already running very late, to do this in this format.
Sorry, just say it on that one, the assurance opinion. I beg your pardon.
We would have known about this a year ago if she'd done it as an advisory rather than as waiting for the full opinion to come out.
I was confused. I was taking it too literally.
Right. Okay. Michael.
Thank you very much for that. Sally, I had 3 questions. You've answered 2 of them already. One of them was to do with the meeting with the chairman, which took place yesterday. The other one was to do with recruitment, where obviously it is an important element. My third question, in fact, whether it's an observational question, I'm very pleased to see the level of cooperation with Wokingham, Reading and Oxford, for instance, in providing input. Do we reciprocate? Have we been asked at any stage to assess other councils, for instance, with our level of expertise? Maybe not. It's just a question.
This is a historic arrangement because historically we have outsourced all our delivery of all our audit work. So we did not have any internal resource to carry out audits, or very, very little. So what we used to do was buy in. We were outsourced mainly to Mazars, and they carried out a lot of our audit work. But we also supplemented that by using the in-house teams at Wokingham and Reading. The arrangement and that's where they had some spare capacity that they were able to sell to other authorities, which we don't have because we don't have a large in-house team. So although now we have created an in-house team, we don't have spare capacity at the moment to share with other organisations. So it isn't something we've done up to now.
It could happen one day.
It could be. I think it's where they have spare capacity, and I suppose it depends on what our policy would be, whether we would want to go down that route of taking on more auditors just to be able to sell those services on to other people. With these other internal audit departments, they had historically bigger audit plans, and as they reduced their audit plans, that meant they had spare capacity with their existing auditors, and that's why they were then sharing that resource capacity with other authorities. Whereas we're in a slightly different position because we're starting from ground zero and building up our team.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
The other Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, thank you for the comprehensive report. My question, the first question is, how do we select the independent assessor that does the sort of review of effectiveness of internal audit?
We basically looked at providers in the market. So we had three options we could have gone with. The first one was a peer review that was would have been with a number of authorities in Bedfordshire, I think, where they were each sort of head of audit would be carrying out an independent review on another local authority. So that was one of the options that was originally available to us. And then I also sought a couple of other options as well. The first one being the SIPFA one, and the other one being one of the other audit partnerships. So we had sort of about three bodies that we could go to. I mean, ultimately, the key one that people would go to would be SIPFA, with their expertise and clear independence and objectivity. So we looked and explored those other options. In actual fact, I think the one of them was more expensive, and the other one they weren't able to deliver in the end because during COVID they just stopped doing these peer reviews, and I don't think they'd ever got back into doing them. But was very happy to go with SIPFA. The other authorities in Berkshire have generally gone with SIPFA for their first review, as we used I think Croydon for our first one. So I suppose we go with what we're looking for, who is actually providing that sort of service of assessment and where that's available, and generally probably is sort of almost benchmarking it against SIPFA as being the main one that anyone would go for, and that's where we opted to go this time around. And that was, and the agreement for that was made with Stuart as Section 151 Officer, Stuart McKellar.
So we've gone for the best, really. Okay, that's good. My second question was regards to one of the advisory recommendation, which was to employ apprentices or training. Now, I'm reading here, we have, what's it called? We don't have a senior audit post anymore. So can we employ 2 apprentices, or do we just go for one?
Well, no, it's on. Yeah, we do have at the moment. We started off with we were going to recruit 1 senior auditor, and then we recruited 2. But one of them left. She was sort of struggling really, so she left. So we either have the option of either having our own staff or trying to buy in more services from Wokingham or from other providers. And so we were trying to create a larger in-house team by having 2 senior auditors. So at the moment we recruited 2, 1 left, so we're left with 1 senior auditor, and at the moment I have a temporary senior auditor that's assisting us, so we have got 2 senior auditors in effect. If we take on an apprentice, I would see that as being supplementary to those arrangements. So it would mean that, if anything, we would be buying in less resource from external providers. Because last year we had a lot of different external providers that were helping us. We had Wokingham that have always helped us. We had TIA, who always do our IT audit, but we also additionally had another contractor that we were buying in services for to assist us with the school audits. So my idea would be that we would try to have 2 senior auditors plus the apprentice really as well. But the apprentice will be working on these more straightforward audits, assisting us with the delivery, say for example of the schools, assisting the other senior auditors to carry out those audits as they train up until they can carry out their own audits. In the meantime, I will retain the temporary senior auditor that we have, and then look to see how we can recruit for for replacement of him. We do have a lot of difficulty trying to recruit, and at the moment we do have a very good temp, so I'm inclined to actually hold on to him for the moment if we can, because it would be so hard to find anyone who would be as good. He is very good, as I'm sure Michelle would.
Is that an
Really?
agency staff?
Yeah, he's through an agency. He is through an agency. Yeah. No, we recruited him through the matrix arrangement. Through the matrix arrangement. The matrix arrangement. The council has an arrangement whereby they use this facility called Matrix, where you basically post on all your job adverts and for temporary staff and so on, and then agencies will then upload CVs for people they are putting forward to take up those temporary posts. So it means that it's a good way to get a large number of agencies to access and provide the CVs for temps that they have on their books that might be able to fill the post that you've got. So it's quite, I found it quite a good arrangement actually whenever I've used it.
Michael, just going back to your point about the SIP for assessment, just to note that we're supposed to have them every 5 years, and I've been chairman I think for 8 years now, and this is the first one I've had, so so I think we're a bit behind on that, but I think COVID got in the way a bit, so that's why I'm glad that we've actually got a very good report out of it with very little recommendations, which is really good. Just Sally, just a thought on the three inadequates, the Green Homes Grant, the parenting assessments and the School D. Is it possible to give us some indication of when you might be going back in to reassess those three?
Yes, certainly. With the Green Homes Grant, Is it on or?
Yes.
Yeah, with the Green Homes Grant, it's not my intention to look at that at the moment until they actually get in the situation where they are, where they have got grant monies that they are utilising. There were very, very weak arrangements in that area. There were issues with changes in the service moving from one directorate to another, and there being gaps in management over the period, so junior staff were left to unfortunately to get on with things and were not actually following proper processes, and I'm confident that that situation is fully resolved, so I wouldn't expect there to be any further issues, but if there is the situation where they are getting any significant more monies, we will go in and have a discussion with them about to reiterate what they've got to do and the improvements they needed to make to the controls. But I would be very surprised if there were similar problems with that again. Okay. With the school, we will go back and we will probably look to do that. Probably because we did the audit quite late on, we will probably look to do it more in Q1 of 2024. But in the meantime, we will ask them for updates on how they're progressing on that. And then the other one, the parenting assessments, I think we've already got that one scheduled in for Q2. Right. So we will be looking at that then at that point.
That one was part of the 2021 audit anyway, so that's taken a while to come through to here. So I'm glad that it's actually, it's relatively soon. So, okay. Are there any further questions? Bob?
In the beginning of the report, you refer to a whole set of conditions, and I think the chairman have already spoken to you about colour coding them so we actually understand what's going on. And further on, where you've gone from last year to this year, it'd be useful to have that colour coded. But the bit I was confused about is on pages 18, 19 and 22, don't look it up, you've got these three key issues. And then on pages 32, 33 and 43, it has this wonderful word of finalised. And I was sitting there thinking, how on earth is this inadequate, since at the end it says it's not a problem anymore? So I was just confused. Either at the beginning we should be saying something about it's all under control or all done now. So I'm now confused about what does inadequate mean. Because on this table at the end it says status finalised. What does that mean? Well, take one on page 43.
The status at the end is really just about the status of the audit report. The table at the end is really talking about when it talks about the status, it's the status of the audit report. So it's when we finalise the audit report. It isn't when the issues have been addressed.
Okay, so I asked the question slightly differently. What I'd like to see in this report is exactly what is happening with those three issues.
Well, that would be something that it's something that would be looked at in terms of sort of follow-up, but a lot of those, that's really down to the management really to take those issues forward until we come back to the point of doing follow-up. But what I talked to the chair about yesterday is that at the moment we do follow-up of those audits where we've issued an inadequate or a partial opinion. We will go back and do a formal re-audit of those in effect. Where we have given an adequate opinion, we tend to just ask the management for an update of that.
No, forgetting those, I was just concerned that how do you close the loop? Because you've said three things are inadequate. This report doesn't really say, well, we expect that to be cleared by when? What's the target? What's the goal?
I see, yes. I know exactly what
and
you
it
mean.
doesn't say anything in here
yeah.
that says, yes, we've identified things. Okay, don't bore us with the details, but I'd like to see something that tells management, I expect that to be resolved by
yes.
X.
Well, I can do that moving forward. I think that would probably be a very useful idea to actually set out when they've actually said they're going to be addressing these points by. I think that would be very beneficial. We talked yesterday when we met, the chair and I, about the fact that we are putting in place a recommendation tracker, and that will start to identify when audit recommendations are coming up and when they're falling behind, so we can report back to you on that and what the position on those, and highlight to departmental management teams and CMT and to this committee where there are difficulties in audit recommendations not getting implemented in line with what management have originally committed to in the audit reports, because I think that's really what you're getting at, really.
What I'm really getting at is it's an interesting audit report, but what happens to it? It's fine to hear all the words you said, but if that's sent back to departmental managers on all the headings, whatever their grading is, I'd expect there to be something within the report that says what you expect them to do and by when. Otherwise, the report simply says, that's what I found on date X. But where's the instruction to the departments to do something? Where's that recorded?
The agreement of what action they're going to take forward is within the individual reports. And I think, I mean, if I was to include that in here, that would be an extremely lengthy report with all the detail that we would have on individual reports. It would be massive. I think that would be a little bit too cumbersome to address, which is why I'm sort of suggesting that perhaps the way forward is to say, well, they'd identified these actions to address these 6 recommendations, and the final deadline for implementing all these is that. But, you know, I mean, you can at any point, if you want to see any of the reports, then you're entitled to have them if you wanted any more information. But I do think if we can have that tracker up and running, I think that will be really beneficial, and it'll hold people to account better.
Yes, because I mean, from my professional experience, in the end, the only thing you need is an action list, and departmental heads need to know what they're expected of them and by when and by whom. And the only final one, and not that I'm a glutton for punishment, but I do recommend on page 59 that if you're going to have regular meetings with the chairman, the vice chairman ought to get involved as well, just in case the chairman can't turn up.
Yes, I'm very happy for you to...
Not that I'm a glutton for meetings.
very, very happy for you to join the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, you got another question?
Yeah, I just want to follow up with the recommendation tracker that you're going to present, can we have the numbers of recommendations? Not details, just the numbers.
Yeah.
That's all. Okay.
Yes, yeah. We can have the numbers. Throw them off. Yeah, we're at the moment, we're setting that up with ICT, so they're developing the, we're going to be using SharePoint lists for that, and then what we will do is hopefully then ICT can help develop some Power BI reports so we can generate management information off for you. But I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take them to do that, to be honest, because they've got other commitments. But we are working to try and get that up and running, because I think it's quite important, and it should steer greater improvement and more action on a more timely basis to address the points that are coming out of the audit reports.
Maybe we need to have a chat. I was running a project in business where we had 10,000 actions running across the company, done through a relational database, and you could actually identify by department, by individual, by date, whatever you wanted to do. So you could actually say to the departmental head, you could just print out their report and say, have you done all these things? Because it's so easy to lose, because what people tend to do is they have a set of minutes and put all the actions on the end of it, and then the minutes get lost. Or you produce a report like this, which you don't want to make too complicated, but then where's the connection between what you're asking for and the departmental head doing it? So it was a universal action list throughout the organisation, all departments on everything, and they were, by the way, the actions were only one line, and only one person owned them, but it said when it was raised, who's going to do it and by when.
That would be good. That would be very helpful.
It should be metaphorically stuck to the department head's forehead.
Well, all I can say is it's quite amusing, because you can actually sit in your office and analyse by department, by individual actionee, by the product or whatever it is. So you can actually do a complete analysis without actually talking to them. So, and then you can go along and say, by the way, why are all these running over?
Yeah, just a comment that you made about colour coding. It's something I did discuss on our little chat yesterday. The table's on page 18 onwards, one that had 3 columns, which is the current audits that have just been done. We're going to take the right-hand column and actually make the right-hand box, instead of just black and white, make the background colour the colour of the audit. So if it's inadequate, it'll be red. If it's good, it'll be green. That sort of thing. So we'll colour code those, and the table further down on page, is it 24 onwards? No. 24 onwards, where we're reassessing the left-hand box with the title will be the colour of the old audit, and the right-hand box will be the colour of the new audit. So you can see instantly whether there's been a change or whether it stayed the same or whatever. So, okay, that was a suggestion anyway. Are there any further questions on this item? Oh,
So,
Michael.
we used to have a risk register or something like that accompanied the report, or is this is not the report? I'm sure we used
A
to.
heat map? No.
No, risk.
The risk register comes at a separate,
Okay.
as a separate item,
Gotcha.
and it isn't in this agenda.
Gotcha.
In that case, I think we're done on this item. If we thank you, Sally. We'll move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 6, which is the annual governance statement. Sanjay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm seeking this committee's approval of the 2021-22 annual governance statement, which is effectively a statement setting out the position of the Council's governance arrangements, the state of the Council's governance arrangements over the last 12 months. If approved, it will have to be signed off by the leader and the chief executive. I'm not going to go through the whole of the report. I'll just pick on the key themes, if I may, just in terms of the framework. As in previous years, there's 3 elements to this statement, to the annual governance statement. The first element is that the statement represents a report on the key elements of the council's governance framework. Now, that element doesn't change from year to year because the council's governance framework is fairly fixed. And if you look on page 64 of the papers, you'll see a diagrammatic representation of the framework, which basically sets out the different aspects of how Bracknell Forest is governed. So you'll see there's the ethical framework, which is very much about standards. You'll see overview and scrutiny is included. You'll see the role of statutory officers. You'll see the role of risk. So that's all the same from year to year. But the second element of the statement is perhaps the more important, because that's the bit that does change from year to year, which is an examination or a review of the effectiveness of those governance arrangements. So in actual fact, how are they working in practice? And so to do this, what I do is go through a series of assurances against 7 CIPFA principles on good governance. So there is guidance from CIPFA which sets out 7 principles, and I've referred to them on pages 66 to 72, and they're in the coloured boxes representing good principles of good governance, and I've given assurance against each. And so that's the second element of the report. And the third element is an action plan, because obviously once I've reviewed the effectiveness, what you want to see and what the public would want to see is that there's a recognition that if there are areas for improvement, we've got an action plan. And on pages 73 to 75, I've reviewed last year's action plan, and I've also put in actions for this year. So this is very much an overview. If I can just say that of these 7 principles, I've given an assurance against each, because by and large, we do have robust governance arrangements in Bracknell Forest. I've examined these based on questionnaires which I've sent to senior officers, and on my own reflections and attending CMT and reviewing CMT reports, and a general understanding from my role as monitoring officer of how work is being conducted across the council. So I've been able to give full assurances against 6 of the 7 principles. The one where I've given a partial assurance is in relation to principle D, and that's on page 68. And that's basically the one which refers to how we as a council determine the interventions necessary to optimise the achievement of our intended outcomes. So we've got a series of outcomes that we seek, and those are reflected in our council plan at the beginning of each 4-year cycle and every year. And in terms of the interventions to make sure that those actions that are set out in the action plan happen, we've got not just the council plan, but we've got the directorate business plan, the service plans, and also the appraisal. Now, in terms of the interventions, one of those will be in relation to operational management in terms of each service area. And as I think everyone across this table will be aware, we did have an Ofsted inspection of our special educational needs and disability special educational needs service, which was deemed to be inadequate. And there is work that's taking place. There's a written statement of response which has been produced and shared with the executive. So that is work in progress. But clearly, in view of that, I wasn't able to give a full assurance. I think that's something that needs to be remedied, and that is reflected in the action plan, which I've set out in the appendix towards the end. The other point, which is a point of caution, is given the changes in terms of operational leadership with the change in chief executive, we will need to monitor the leadership role within the organisation, and that relates more to Principle E, which is about developing the entity's capacity. So with change, there are always risks, and we do need to make sure that the transition from one chief executive to another, there's nothing unusual about that. All organisations experience that, is as seamless as possible. So that's just picking up on a potential area of risk there. But other than that, there's a lot of actions, a lot of activities which have been ones which the organisation can celebrate. We've talked about, or rather, I've mentioned within the report the The fact that we've had no code of conduct complaints, so in terms of our ethical standards, that's been a real plus. Working through COVID and continuing with robust decision-making and transparent decision-making processes and managing that with the technology that we're all using today at this meeting has been a success. The Heathlands Dementia Care Centre, which opened earlier on this year, has also been a real success story in terms of dementia care within the organisation. Food recycling wastes have also been sustained at a really high level. And last but not least, we've also had a peer review of the organisation, which again identified real positives about the organisation, about the way it's run, about its corporate leadership and its leadership from a political point of view as well. So all in all, it's a very positive report. The final point I would just like to make is in relation to the action plan, so that it's clear what the actions are, which notwithstanding the embedded framework, which still need to be looked at. So I have referenced on page 75 the proposed action to make sure that there's a smooth transition and consolidation in the strategic direction of the council with the change in the head of paid service. There is, in terms of Downshire Homes, which is our company, which is a directly owned company to house the homeless, we do have a proposal to dissolve the company, but that's been placed on hold at the moment. And as you'll see there, we're going to be reviewing the position because there are going to be some potential changes to the rules around MRP, minimum revenue position, and that's very much about debt repayments. The government is in the process of looking at that, but we just want to make sure that there's nothing that comes out of that legislation which might impact on our decision one way or the other. The SEN report, the SEN's written statement of action, of course, that's going to be monitored across the whole year. The whistleblowing policy needs to be reviewed. There is, again, legislation that's pending around that, so I'm waiting for that legislation to be introduced before we review the whistleblowing policy that we've got in place. A contracts register is in the process of being developed so that we can monitor all of our contracts. We spend a significant amount of money in terms of our budget on procurement. So we do want to make sure we're identifying what procurements are coming up in the next few months, what contracts are coming to a close, and we have good commissioning arrangements around those. And the starting point has to be a solid contract register. And finally, recruitment and retention, which is a problem not just for Bracknell Forest, I think for all local authorities across Berkshire. So we are going to be reviewing that in the light of challenging market conditions. So that's an action which is going to be held by CMT, and at the end of the year we'll see how that progresses, and I will report back on that in the next statement, as I will for all the other actions. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of the detail of the report. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any questions? Michael? Yes, on. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Can you, on the, I think it's partial assurance or assured, there's a point 2 here that says progress with the joint venture development project. What concerns do you have about that?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, the joint venture should be progressing. The only issue is obviously in light of the current commercial situation in terms of prices and resource prices, construction costs. There were estimates in terms of what the total spend would be and what the likely amount that the council would get back as a member of that joint venture would be. But at the moment, we are just monitoring the costs of the arrangements, and that's again in light of economic conditions, not just in this country, but globally. So we do need to make sure that the returns that were being anticipated and identified in the original business plans can be realised.
Peter, you want to add to that?
Thanks, Chair.
Do you need to declare an interest because you're on the JV?
I am, but I don't think
Okay.
I need to declare an interest for what I was going to say.
Right. Okay. Go on.
This is a public meeting, isn't it?
Yeah. Being
I think
broadcast.
before we say anything more about the JV, there is a huge amount.
Oh, sorry.
There's a huge amount of commercial in confidence around the JV, which is inappropriate for this meeting.
It is in the pink, so.
Last question. The last report, the last item on the agenda, we had an assessor, an external assessor every 5 years, or assessment every. Do we have something similar here? Or is yeah?
Sorry, Councillor, when you say external assessor in relation to what?
To look at this report, something, I don't know, a benchmark or some sort, to just say, yes, this is, if you see what I mean. It's not that I don't trust your judgment, it's just, yep.
So this will be in, and I can defer to Sally if she wants to intervene, but this will be incorporated into the accounts, and it will be looked at by the external auditors and verified that actually what I've put in there reflects the situation on the ground.
Yeah. So unfortunately, this one gets assessed every year.
Okay.
So not just every 5 years. Well, thank you for that. Any further questions? In that case, we shall move on to. Oh, is there? Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, apologies.
on page 60.
In that case, can I move the recommendation item 2.1 on page 61? Do I have a... Thank you, Dot. All those in favour? That's carried.
Chairman, can I just take you back to...
Right, and retrospectively, can I move the recommendations at item 2.1 and 2.2 on page 11? Seconder? Oh, okay. Michael, seconding. And all those in favour? That's carried unanimously. In that case, we will now move on to agenda item 7, which is the Standards Annual Report. Back to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief. This is an information report rather than one for action. I've already alluded to the fact that there have been no code of conduct complaints, either within the borough or the parish over 21-22. It's the first time that's happened since I joined the council in 2015. Well, we had a lockdown in the previous year, but we still managed to get quite a few complaints. So I think that's a success story, and that might be partly down to the work that you as councillors have done in terms of the member working group that was set up. So there's nothing to report in terms of, I'm pleased to say, in terms of complaints, and that stands in contrast to one or two of our neighbouring boroughs. And I think I made reference to West Berkshire, which has in the region about 20 odd in the same period. So that's a credit to yourselves, and I'm, as monitoring officer, really pleased to be able to report that. In terms of the rest of the report, I mean, I think the only actions I would refer to was the fact that we did have a meeting of the Code of Conduct Working Group to decide whether or not we needed to update our Code of Conduct here at Bracknell Forest in light of the Model Code of Conduct, which was introduced last year by the LGA. But the decision taken by the working group was that you were quite satisfied with the way that it's been operating, our current arrangements, since 2012. And the only changes that were proposed were that our code should be redrafted to the first person, which is how the LGA code is, to make reference to the mayoral charter, which was introduced last year, and also to cross-reference the guidance which is in the LGA code, which is helpful. So the substance of our code will remain the same. It's just really quite peripheral changes, and those will be reported back to the working group shortly via the chair of the working group. So that's effectively all in terms of the code of conduct. I think beyond that, I should say that there was a report from the Committee for Standards in Public Life in January 2019, and there were some recommendations which are aimed at government around changing legislation. Government finally got round to providing its response earlier this year, and you'll be surprised, well, you won't be surprised that they've decided that none of the recommendations which were put forward by the Committee for Standards in Public Life need to be actioned in terms of legislation. So there were a number around sanctions, around issues around, when is a member acting in their capacity and not in their capacity. We do have the guidance, but it's quite clear there won't be any new legislation. And that the same applies to sanctions, though they will review or keep under review sanctions. But there's nothing in the pipeline as far as I'm aware. That's all I wanted to say, Chair. Thank you very much.
Questions, Bob?
Yes, Sanjay, Councillor Bob Wade, can we just make sure that we let parish town councils know the position of Bracknell Forest? Because we've been hanging on to decide whether or not we'd modify our codes of conduct and so on based on your findings. So when they're concluded, if you can let us know. And presumably you don't know how to spell four. Yeah, four.
I have liaised with the clerk at Crowthorne, and I'm just waiting to, as I said, finalise the final version, which will go to the chair of the working group. And once he's signed it off, then I will make sure that goes through to all clerks, either directly to all clerks or via the town and parish liaison group.
Thank you.
Michael?
It's on. Right, okay. Page 80, paragraph 11, making reference to the independent person who has resigned. Given our exemplary performance over that period, is this a role that actually could be shared with one of our adjacent neighbours in order that the cost could be allocated pro rata? So we would pay nothing if it continues at 0, and the others would pay 100%. I like that idea.
I have had discussion. We do have a Berkshire monitoring officer group that I'm a part of with my colleagues across Berkshire, and we have picked this up. So we've shared details of all our independent persons, and we are looking. I know the head of democratic services is currently looking at recruitment, but we can look at, as you've suggested, looking at a joint arrangement. I think the only difficulty might be in terms of location and actually attending meetings. But as we're doing remote meetings, that probably opens up the market quite significantly. So, Councillor, I think your suggestion is a very good one.
Just with remote, wouldn't we have a problem though legally? Because if you're making a decision, now think about that, it's just the legal aspect of it.
The independent member is non-voting, so it doesn't matter. Peter?
Thanks, Chair. Is presumably the independent member a statutory requirement?
So we're referring here to the independent person, which is slightly different to the independent person. It is a statutory requirement. We should have one. Ideally, we should have one in reserve as well. So, there is a deficit there. We do need to fill that as quickly as possible.
Is there a risk to the council, the fact that we haven't got?
The risk is if we do have a code of conduct complaint, then when I, as a monitoring officer, makes a decision in relation to whether to refer it for investigation, then I ought to be liaising with the independent person and getting his view. So yes, there is a risk, but what we will do in the meantime is, if I can say, borrow independent person from one of our neighbouring boroughs, But I think that there is a governance issue there in terms of making sure that that person is actually authorised to act, and that's a different issue.
The risk is contained anyway, is what you're saying.
It is, yes.
Thank you.
Just a quick one from me, Sanjay. On the table on page 79, the previous year's data, you were reviewing the period for 21-22, but you've missed off 2021 off the bottom of the table.
Thank you, Chair. I just spotted that about half an hour ago, so I'll make sure that's remedied before it goes to Council. Thank you.
Any further questions? In that case, thank you very much. I think that concludes the agenda for this evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance. Thank you, Sanjay, for your report.